First Samuel 17, off the top of your head?
Does Saul go to Endora?
No, it's not Saul and Endora. It's something about David.
Is it David that said, I can't take this because I didn't pay for it, something like that?
No, it's not that.
Not that one either?
No.
Is that what?
First Samuel 17. What's 17?
I don't know. David and Goliath.
Yes, ma'am.
Don't tell us that.
It's all right. David's going to take care of you. He gets you $10 after tonight. That worked out really well. Fantastic. Yeah, he does a lot of things. I want to come to First Samuel tonight and be honest with you. While I was away, I heard somebody preach on this passage, and who doesn't know David and Goliath, right? If there's one story that anybody's going to know in the Bible, it's David and Goliath, and it's one of those that's so familiar it runs the risk of us just kind of like, oh yeah, here's another message on David and Goliath. And really, I just want to kind of point out a couple things. And a lot of times when it's the most familiar, it's time to just stop on the main points and let those kind of marinate. So I want to walk you through just a couple things, and my hope is that it'll give you some tools on your own to maybe the next couple of days, spend some time in this story and visit it in a fresh way with the Lord. But for just time's sake, we'll bounce around a little bit of it, but I want you to come down to verse number 50, 1 Samuel 17 and verse number 50. And there we read, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, and there was no sword in the hand of David. Now, again, you knew who won this story, even if you've never been in church, right? Somebody says, well, what do you know about David? He killed a giant. He killed Goliath, right? So with that, you bring a lot of just like checked boxes when you think about that. But I want you to just pause on those first three words of verse 50. So David prevailed. And there's a lot of meaning that's in there. And so takes us back to what's preceded it. In other words, like here's how it happened and here's the recap. And we read there that David prevailed. The Hebrew word there has this idea of like a physical victory. Like it's an actual material conquest. There is something that is now accomplished that is tangible. Okay. So you start thinking about the story and you're like, okay, well, David's just a young man and he's prevailing. He's winning this victory over this very accomplished soldier. Yeah. But the fact that he's also a giant, that changes everything. And he did it without a sword in his hand. He did it with a sling and a stone. But just pause on this for a second. And you see this idea that David prevailed in the situation. And that takes us to think about David's actions in this. And what was it that brought us to this point so that the writer of 1 Samuel 17 could say that David prevailed, right? There's got to be some things that were the ingredients in the cake to make that become a reality. So let's revisit a few of them. Beginning of the chapter starts with David the armies of the Philistines, the army of the Israelites are squared off against each other. And instead of the entire armies going to battle against each other, here comes the champion of the Philistines, Goliath, out with a challenge, one-on-one, and whoever wins, the other nation will serve the other. Okay. This goes on for 40 days. Now, just put yourself in that mindset. 40 days. What was 40 days ago? 40 days, we were still in May. Okay. 40 days, day after day. There's no pulling your phone out to get distracted or, all these other things. They're standing in these fields. They are squared up. And here comes Goliath all of these days, just challenging, and no one is answering. Thousands are in this Israelite army, and none of them will move to go challenge Goliath. David at that point is home taking care of the sheep, and then comes the moment where his father, after these 40 days go by, knows that his other sons need some provisions and things like that. So he sends David out, and David will go with them. Verse 20, David rises up early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, and took and went as Jesse commanded him. And he came to the trench, and the host was going forth to battle, and a shout for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put battle in array, army against the army. So David pulls up on the scene, and then we find him not long after he gets there. He hears what this Philistine is doing, and how he's defying the armies of Israel and defying God. And you can pick up in 28, because one of David's oldest brother starts to try to judge the intentions of David's heart. And he does not know David's heart, but he's trying to judge the intentions why David would want to take action in this situation. So he says, I know your heart. I know your pride, naughtiness of your heart. You come down to the battles. You might just see the battle. In other words, you're just the little guy trying to get in the middle of something. You don't really want what's right. You just want to be seen and involved in some way. And first thing I want you to just pick up, verse 29, David responds, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? And that's one of those phrases in scriptures you've probably heard that mentioned before, right? David saying, is there not a cause? Well, it's pretty simple. The word there in Hebrew for cause is just reason. So David's like, isn't there something that should be preventing all of this standing around and wringing of the hands and being fearful? Isn't there something that should galvanize somebody to do something about this blasphemous giant who thinks he can handle everything, but he's nothing compared to our God? And David brings it back to this idea of, is there not a cause? Is there not a reason? So what's on the line here? What is David so confident in? There's a cause. There's a cause for everything. There's a reason for everything that you and I do. It's the glory of God, is it not? And, glory is one of those church words that gets kind of wrapped in, and we kind of expect everybody knows what glory means, but it's the honor. God's name's on the line. It's the rightful praise due to him. Does God do everything for his own glory? Absolutely. Does he have the right to do what he does so that he is famous and no one else is? Absolutely, because he's God and he's got a leg up on everybody else. He doesn't need our opinions in this. He says, come, let us reason together, not because we have anything to bring to the table, but because he is God and he can make it right. But David has been captured by something that there is a reason for him to act here. And that is God's praise, God's glory, that God would be seen for who he is. Okay. Now, the significance of that shouldn't be lost, because there's nothing about David physically that would say that he should be able to win this battle. There's nothing about David. There's nothing about David that's going to be measuring up in anybody's sense. Matter of fact, Saul's going to try to give him his armor, right? And he's going to say, I can't go out there in this. It's too much. It's not. So what has David been captured by? Throughout his young life at this point, he has become so persuaded that God will do what brings him the most glory. Okay. And to see anyone out there defying God, it just stirred him up. Someone that was refusing to give God his due praise did not frighten David, right? Now, we've been talking about this in Corinthians where, we preach the gospel. We're not trying to get in philosophical discussions or out-reason or outwit people. We just proclaim the message of the cross, and that's what we do. And in so doing, it lowers our confidence in self and places all of our trust that God will glorify his son in the revelation of the gospel that he does in the heart. David here has a reason to act, and that reason is God deserves his praise. And so when David says, is there not cause to his brother and to those that are around him? And you see kind of 30 and 31, the whole thing spreads till it gets before Saul. It's almost like David is this one guy among all these people who gets it, that God's not going to tolerate this heathen man thinking that he can walk all over the Lord and his people. And so that's galvanizing for us, right? That to know that what is going to happen is to God's glory. Is that not what gives us hope about how this whole world's going to wind up? That it's all going to work out to what brings God glory. So then as long as we're on his side, we're good, right? So there's a reason, but come down to let's see, 35. It's not just that he has a reason. There's some things that have gone on in David's life that have prepared him for this. 32, David says to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Saul responds, you're too young. He's a man of war. David responds by saying, thy servant kept his father's sheep. There came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of a flock, and I went out after him, smote him, delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. Look at 37. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. 37 is key to that. There's some fantastic imagery in that, right? Wouldn't you like to see David, this young kid, fighting the lion and fighting the bear, and that imagery of him just like, here comes that lion, and he grabs it by its beard and just, all the guy stuff. That's fantastic. But that's not the star of those verses. The phrase that gets you is verse 37. The Lord that delivered me. It continues, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. David has some experience with God's deliverance. Okay. He has seen God come through, and God come through in situations that were utterly hopeless. So yes, David has a reason, and he believes in God's glory and what that will go forward. But David also acts here as he does because God's already proven that he is able. He's already proven he's able. So when everybody else is drowned in their fears, David says, listen, God's already proven he'll take care of me. I'll just go trusting the Lord, and that's enough. So, he says the Lord delivered me. And for David, at that point of his life, the greatest deliverance he had experienced in a physical sense are the lion and the bear and, all of those things. But, you and I have experienced some deliverance, and the greatest of that being the forgiveness of our sin, right? And if God can and will deliver us from the condemnation and wrath and just consequence of our sin in the sense of redemption, can we not trust that God's going to well take care of everything else? It's kind of one of those, every lesser thing is taken care of by the greater. If God's done the greater, then you can just rest that everything lesser is also going to be taken care of. And so David is absolutely persuaded in the face of this insurmountable situation that there's nothing this giant can do to him because his God will take care of him. The level of freedom from fear in David is directly connected to his experience with the deliverance of God. Remember, it's God's glory that's on the line. And David, in standing up for the Lord and trying to do what he knows is right for the Lord, knows that he's putting his life not in Goliath's hands. He's putting his life in God's hand. And God, who delivered him before in those situations, has just proven that there's nothing that this giant can do to him that's going to cause any trouble. So he's got a reason, and he's got things to remember, and drastic things. I mean, like, just think of a kid fighting off a lion and a bear. I mean, this kid just fighting them off and winning and running them off and killing them. So you see that, and then let's keep coming. Come down to 46. This idea of deliverance again. He says, "This day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand. I will smite thee," this is David speaking to Goliath, "and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air, to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel." Now here's a young man thinking in much broader terms than just, oh, what video game can I play? I don't know, right? Or what's the instant gratification of the moment? He's thinking in a way that is, look, what's going to take place here is going to make God famous in all the earth. Why? Look at 47. He says, "All this assembly shall know that the Lord saves not with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." David's got the reason, he's got things to remember, but he's also got a reliance. Okay. Why is all this going to go the way it's going? Why is David so confident? Because he's relying on the Lord. Okay. He's not consumed with all the lesser things and all, like, well, what if he does this? How do I, this whole battle he sees as one that belongs to the Lord. David just sees himself as a tool. He's just in the situation for whatever God has, and he knows that God will be the one to ensure that this goes the way God intends it to. Isn't that freeing? Isn't that freeing? When you know that the outcomes are not yours to worry about, you know that the whole situation is the Lord's, and in knowing it is the Lord's, he's going to work it out for his glory. He's going to deliver his people, and his people have really one response: just rely on him. Okay. Now think of this. Here he goes down the hillside. Goliath starts coming to him, and David takes off running towards him. Do you see that moment? Like, it's all words. It's all theory. It's all perception until Goliath takes that first step. Then David has moved beyond knowing the right answers. Oh yeah, it is for God's glory. And oh yeah, God will deliver. And oh yeah, God can be depended on. But now he's got to act. See that? He's got to act. Look, come back to 50 for a second. It says, "So David prevailed." Okay. David cannot prevail without action. You say, well, wait a minute. Well, hold on. God is the one that's fighting the battle. Yes. But what does the scripture say? It says David prevailed. See that? Is God going to prevail? Yes, God's going to prevail. But there's a man in the situation who is going to prevail, who's going to win a victory, who's going to experience God do something that will alter a nation, his life, and those he loves for the rest of their lives. Okay. I was kind of thinking about this a little bit today. more spiritual victories in life seems to be a better reality than less, right? More of, wow, this is clearly what God has done, and this is clearly his direction, and he's opening the doors. It's not anything we're doing. It's just we're following him, and he's just, more of that is better than not. Simple. I know I'm a simple guy, but like that's straightforward enough for me. And if I take David's name out and put mine in, or you put yours there, David, you just leave it there. At the end of the day, I think we would all, for the right reason and on the right reliance and trust in the Lord, we would all love to say, love it to be true of our lives that maybe God could pen words that says, so Ben prevailed, so Sheila prevailed, so Gracie prevailed, right? We would love that be a reality, that we are part of that, okay? So with that as a reality, there is no prevailing apart from acting. You can know these things all day long. But the fact that God will be glorified, the fact that he has already delivered you and the confidence that brings, and then just dependence and walking with him and trusting him produces the action. Okay. David can't prevail without acting, but David had to act on the things that God had already done in his life. See that? There's this inseparable connection. David is going to prevail, but David cannot prevail without the action that he must take in this moment, which is Goliath walking and meeting it head on. Okay. All these other things are the byproduct of what Goliath has been doing, what God has been doing, all these things swirling around. But now's the moment. Am I going to put rubber to the road? Am I going to take the step? David did. 49. David puts his hand in the bag, takes the stone, slings it, hits the Philistine in the forehead, sinks deep, and he falls on his face to the earth. So David prevailed. Okay. So let me ask you this. Not just in a brief time in the Word tonight, but have you come to understand that God will do what brings himself glory in your life? He's not following your path. He's following his path, and he's going to do what brings himself glory in your life. Okay. Is that what's best for you? Have you come to the place where you've said, okay, whatever brings God glory, whatever he chooses is best? Okay. Hold that for a second. Have you come to the place where you have found that he will care for you, and his deliverance has displayed that there's not a situation you're going to come to where he's not going to take care of you? Have you come to that place and found he's dependable, and whatever situations come up, he's trustworthy? Have you found that? Okay. Have you come to the place where you find yourself relying on him, that your strength doesn't come from your own ideas or your own principles and all that? It comes from walking in the Spirit, trusting him to do what only he can do. How are you going to win those battles over the sin in your life? How are you going to win the problem when it's the relational issues and all those things that we all have and we're all working through? How are we going to? By relying on the Lord. Our trust is in him. It's not in ourselves. It's not in other people. It's not in our things. It's trusting the Lord. Okay. So if you've experienced those things, then what you got now and what's coming is really just a matter of action based on what God has already done for you. Okay. David prevailed because David acted in accordance with what God had already been doing in his life. So many times we try to boil it down to like, well, God, give me this sign and I'll know what to do, or God, strike me with the lightning. And that sounds great, but do you really want to get struck by lightning? It's terrible, right? No, who wants that? Yeah. No. but we want God's direction sometimes, and it's like, well, do this, God, and do that. And I think so much we already have, if we're paying attention to what God is doing, we have what we need to do the things that are in front of us. We already have it. There are some things that he keeps that are ways to drive us deeper into knowing him, but so much of it we already know. We just need to act. We need to move forward. Okay. Well, how boil that down for me? How do I know what's going to be the thing? This is where I kind of went today as I was thinking on this. And Isaac on Sunday, for the call to worship, he went to Romans chapter 12. And I want to just hit on this for just a moment. Romans 12 and 1 and 2. Again, another very familiar verses. But we read here, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Now, look at 2. And be not conformed to this world. Is it a stretch to say that God's people, the armies that were gathered, were really living kind of conformed to the ideas of the world as they stood paralyzed as Goliath was coming? Oh, we're not strong enough. I couldn't beat that guy. He's too much. He would kill me, and then we'd all be in trouble, and can't do that, right? They're thinking it's conformed to earthly ways. But then here comes David, right? And David's not, his mind and his actions are not conformed to this world. He's thinking about a whole other world and a whole other set of situations and circumstances. He's thinking about God's glory. He's remembering God's deliverance, and he's relying on God's power, for the battle is all his, right? He's not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. What happened on that battlefield that day was not the result of some divine lightning bolt. It was the byproduct of years of David, even as a young man, coming to understand how God works in his life. And though it wasn't, boom, oh, look, he's so different. But the gradual transformation and the renewing of his mind was preparing David to walk out on this battlefield that day with a very clear action to take. Okay? That was it. It was a very clear, straightforward action for him to take. What was it? Take out the giant. Even when everybody else made no sense to him. It was completely wrong. Here's David acting. He's acting according to the mind he's been given. One that knows the purpose of it all. God's going to be glorified, and that's good for me. Knows that God will deliver, and knows that if he just trusts in the Lord, who's the king of the battle, it's all going to work out. The problem is that we often miss what the Lord is doing in the day-to-day that's preparing us, because we're so engaged in everything else. Like we're running to this, we're running to that, our minds, our hearts are so up and down. We don't have to. The greatest discipline we ever have is to bring ourselves before the Lord in his word, in prayer, and walking in the Spirit every single day. In that discipline, God will transform your mind, and you won't even quite realize it. And then these type of moments will be presented, and you will prevail because God's already taught you how to act. So I think the lesson tonight is simply this. What David did was shaped by the transformative work God had done in his life. Okay? David prevailed because he acted according to what God had already been doing and proving in his life. The clear thing this says, I think, to us all is our moments are not staring at a giant on the other side of a battlefield. Our moments sometimes are staring at the person in the mirror and determining to yield today and walk in the Spirit, or a relationship that's not what it needs to be, or the pressures of life and the struggles and all those things that kind of churn and burn and get our attention. God's already teaching us the core lessons to shape how we can act that will bring us to the place where we prevail. Look, we all know we're going to win in the end. The book says it, right? Somebody said, I read the back of the book, we win, I'm good. Yeah, fantastic. However, if the only victory you're going to taste as a Christian is then, it's going to be great then, but you're missing out on so much now. I don't want to miss it now. So let's let the transformative work take place. Father, thank you for the time tonight to look at this familiar passage, and pray, Lord, that you'd cause us just a way to see and remember tonight that you have such a great reason and purpose for what you do, and you are absolutely trustworthy, and you will be praised from all that happens. And so tonight I ask that you'd help us to prioritize looking and remembering now at what you're doing in our lives, walking with you, allowing you to transform our thinking so that as we act in the days ahead, it can be said that we prevailed because we have walked in accordance with what you've done and the transformative power you've placed in our lives. So, Lord, help us to be pleasing to you and follow you. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, then we will